Hi, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Emerging Scholars Network, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for the presentation of Exploring Opportunities in Scientific Publishing. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Todd Ruppar, a professor and associate dean for research and scholarly innovation at the Marcella Niehoff School of Nursing at Loyola University, Chicago. He is also the editor of the Western Journal of Nursing Research, the official journal of the Midwest Nursing Research Society. Before taking on that role, he was the co-editor of the Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing. He brings a wealth of experience and expertise to help us learn about this potential career path as nurse scientists. We will have time at the end of the presentation for questions. However, if you think of anything during the talk, please feel free to type your question in the chat and we will address it at the end. Now, I am happy to hand things over to Dr. Todd Ruppar.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this webinar. Thank you, Connie, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here and joining today. So we're going to talk a little bit about how scientific publishing works, how journals operate, what the different roles are, and what you kind of need or might want to, what skill set and experience you would need to start moving into roles in publishing. Let's see. So for starters, disclosures. So I am currently the editor of Western Journal of Nursing Research. So I have a kind of independent contractor sort of relationship with Sage Publishing, the publisher of the journal. In the past, I had a similar arrangement with Wolters Kluwer, the publisher of Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing, and I also serve on the editorial boards of the Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing and the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing. And sometimes it's just fun to have something to actually have to disclose occasionally because we tend to not have those too often. So for this webinar, the goals are to identify the key responsibilities and time demands associated with roles with scientific journals, what skills and experiences are needed, and strategies to balance editorial work with other roles, if balance is something that's even possible. So for starters, let's talk a bit about different types of publishing. So in academic publishing, we have a subscription model and an open access model. So the subscription model are kind of the traditional journals that are paid for by usually the libraries and the universities that subscribe to them, and you get access through your university library, or you can buy an individual subscription, although few people do that anymore. But you might have a subscription through a society membership, similar to how members of MNRS have an digital subscription to WJNR, or if you're a member of some other society, you have access to their journals, or you can, pay to get access to individual articles, although hardly anybody ever does that because generally you can get it through your library or the library can get it through interlibrary loan, or you can email the authors and say, hi, I don't have access to your article, but I'd really like to read it. Could you please send me a copy? And they're usually happy to do that, although people don't seem to do that as much anymore as they used to. There's also the open access model where the authors pay an article processing charge so that when your article is published, it is freely available to everyone. So that's a different model that is upfront cost to the authors rather than to the subscribers. And those article processing charges can range from $800 to $4,000. And often as nurse scientists, we typically don't have the budget unless we have a grant and have budgeted for it in our grant to be able to pay those things. So who benefits most then in these two models? In the subscription model, the authors tend to benefit because it's not costing us to pay to publish our work, and the publishers obviously benefit because they're earning profits from subscription fees and whatnot. In the open access model, the readers tend to benefit more because they're not having to need a subscription or someone with a subscription to get access to the articles. And of course, the publishers benefit because they're receiving the article processing charges, and the authors still benefit too because your work is getting published, but it's costing you money to do so. Um, but those are two different models. Both are good. They just have different costs associated with them to different people. Some open access journals are what we call predatory journals, where they uh, are not indexed in Medline, PubMed, and all. Your work is likely not to get found. They don't often do a true peer review, and it's uh, they typically charge you upfront costs without guarantee that your work is actually going to get published, and so you want to avoid those. Um, and later on, there's some resources I will show you on how to identify uh, legitimate journals that are better for publishing your work. So what happens after you submit a manuscript? You hit the submit button and it kind of goes off into the void, and you wonder what is happening with it while you're waiting for months to get a decision from the journal. So let's go through that process a little bit. So as an author, you hit the submit button. You feel good. You finally got it off your desk, and it goes to the journal office where an peer review associate, editorial office assistant, whatever their title might be, a staff person either of the journal or the publisher, checks the manuscript in, goes through a checklist to make sure that um, it meets the submission guidelines, depending on how stringent that journal is on initial submissions. Some journals are more um, format free or format agnostic, where they're not worried about you being in the correct formatting on the first submission. They will have you get it in the correct formatting on revision if they send you a revise and resubmit decision. But certain things like making sure that your manuscript is blinded, that you have the necessary disclosures, that the author names on your title page match the author names that you entered into the submission site, things like that. They're going to check all of those things. And if they find something wrong, they'll send it back to you to fix it. But if everything is good on their checklist, they will then send it to the editor who screens the manuscript for good fit with the journal, any obvious quality concerns with the manuscript or the research, reviews the plagiarism check that all manuscripts go through. And if they find any concerns, or if it's just not a good fit, because we get a lot of manuscripts that really aren't a good fit for the journal, they will do what's called a desk reject, where they don't send it out for review. They say, this isn't a good fit, or just doesn't meet our screening standards. And so they send it back to the authors so the authors can send it to another journal without having to wait to get reviewers to say, this isn't a good fit. And so all of us get desk rejected. I get desk rejected. It happens to everybody. It's not something to feel ashamed of. It's just sometimes what we think is a good journal fit, the editor doesn't agree with us. And as I often say, being a journal editor is the one aspect of my life where I actually get the final say, and my family agrees with that. So, but if the fit passes and they think it's good fit, the editor will send it out for review. And so then the editor or an associate editor will identify a list of potential reviewers and invite a handful of people to potentially review your manuscript. Usually, each person who is invited to be a reviewer for a manuscript is given about 7 days to respond. Some journals will give you 10 days, some maybe only 5, just kind of depends. Um, and either the reviewer will agree, which is great, but more often they'll decline or not respond at all. And so then we have to identify additional reviewers, invite more people until we find uh, 2 or 3 reviewers who agree to review it. So once someone agrees to review, they're asked to submit the review within 3 to 4 weeks. Some journals it's 3 weeks, some it's 4 weeks. Sometimes you'll get requests from journals to be a reviewer and they want it in a week or 10 days. And that's a very short time frame. And personally, I don't usually accept those because that doesn't give me enough time to work it into my workflow, but that's an individual decision for you to make when you get review requests. But usually 3 to 4 weeks is what we ask. for people to submit their reviews. And so the people who agreed to review either submit their review or sometimes they don't. Sometimes someone will agree to submit the review and then they vanish, which does happen. And then we have to invite more reviewers until we get the 2 or 3 reviews we need to make a decision. So some journals will make decisions with just 2 reviewers. Some journals need 3 reviewers. We try to get 3 people to agree to review each manuscript, so that if somebody vanishes on us, we at least get 2. We have to have at least 2 reviewers, 2 reviews to make a decision on a manuscript. And so this process of inviting people and then inviting more people and then needing to wait for them to submit their reviews takes a while. And so that's why from when you press submit, you can usually expect about 3 to 4 months, if it's sent out for review, for you to get a decision on the manuscript. Sometimes it takes longer. Often we are asking, 20 people, sometimes 30 or 40 people in order to find 2 people to agree to review a manuscript because everybody feels very busy. And sometimes as an editor, I think somebody might be a good fit as a reviewer, but they look at the title and the abstract and they say, no, this isn't really fitting with my expertise. Um, and so they'll decline. So it just kind of depends. And it's hard to find people. That's kind of one of the biggest challenges, that a lot of editors have these days. So once we get 2 reviews back from reviewers, it then goes into our queue in our manuscript submission system to look at the reviews from the reviewers, look at the manuscript again and read it more closely, uh, and make a decision. And so then if there's associate editors at that journal, they'll make a recommendation to the editor, and the editor will review it. But ultimately, the editor or editor-in-chief makes a decision on the manuscript. And that decision is one of 3 things: either reject, um, or revise and resubmit, or accept. So very, 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 very seldom are manuscripts ever accepted on the first submission. Most people are lucky to have that happen once in your career. I've never had it happen, and I don't expect ever to, because there's always room for improvement. But if you get a revise and resubmit decision, that means the journal is interested and they think that, with some revision, it can be brought up to being acceptable for publication, and that's great. And when you submit the revised manuscript, it then comes back to the beginning of this flow chart. However, not all revised manuscripts are sent back out for review. Depending on the level of revisions needed and whatnot, it sometimes will just the editors will review your revisions and your response to review the reviewers and make a decision based on that. But sometimes, depending on the extent of things or the particular reviewer comments, they'll send it back to the reviewers again to re-review and see if the reviewers feel the revisions were good. But ultimately, when you're revising something and responding to reviewer comments, you don't necessarily have to satisfy the reviewers. You've got to satisfy the editor because it's the editor that makes the decisions. And sometimes the editor disagrees with the recommendations from reviewers too, which happens. So if there's ever questions or you have reviewer comments that are not in agreement, and one reviewer says to change one thing and the other reviewer says to change it differently or keep it, you can always reach out to the editor and say, hey, these are in conflict, and do you have a preference on how we respond to this? Okay, but what you're here for is roles in academic publishing. So the academic publishing world and in the process has a whole number of different people in the neighborhood of publishing. So there's the authors, which is all of us submitting our work, to various journals. The reviewers, who may be blinded or not blinded. And if you're of my age, Mr. Snuffleupagus there on the right was not seen by anybody else in the Sesame Street neighborhood, so he's a blinded reviewer. Um, you have the associate editors who help to find reviewers and make recommendations. You have the editor, who typically is somebody who may or may not be grumpy, um, uh, passing judgment on things and making decisions. And you have the editorial board who advises the editorial team, the editor and associate editors, on the direction of the journal and provides feedback on things. So Yeah, we'll go through a bit of this. So the progression usually is you start off as an author and develop a track record of publications and expertise in an area. Um, and that leads you to be invited to review manuscripts, which can then lead to being invited to be on an editorial board. And if you then have an interest in getting onto the editorial side of things, often getting some experience as an associate editor is really helpful for then getting an editor position. Um, so you all should know the author's role. You're submitting manuscripts. You're learning some of the best and not so best practices from the reviews that you receive on how to evaluate manuscripts and write reviews. And you're developing a reputation as an expert that can then lead you to be asked to be a reviewer. So reviewers, provide evaluations of the quality and the rigor of manuscripts. Um, in most journals, still, we use double-blind review, where neither the reviewers know the author's identity and the authors don't know the reviewer's identity. Some journals are single-blind, and that's usually where the reviewers know who the authors are, but the authors still don't know who the reviewers are. And then there are some journals out there that use an open review model, where the reviewers know who the authors are, and when the manuscript is published, the reviewers' names are also published along with the manuscript. Some journals even publish the reviews along with the manuscript as a supplementary file. The time involvement for being a reviewer varies. Reviewing a manuscript can take as little as an hour. It can take 3 hours, hopefully not more. It's something that takes less time as you get more experienced at it and kind of learn what to look for and have kind of a system set up that you use for um, evaluating the manuscript and writing up your comments. Um, and also, the closer it is to your area of expertise, usually the easier and quicker it is. But the skills that you need to be a reviewer obviously are knowledge of the content or methods, or both, that's used in the manuscript you're being asked to review, and the ability to focus on the content. So a lot of reviewers will want to nitpick and basically copy edit the manuscript and correct publication and spelling and grammar. And that's not what editors are looking for, because we can do that and we have copy editing staff that do that if a manuscript is accepted. What we're looking for is critique of the content, the quality, and the rigor of the manuscript, not copy editing the grammar and punctuation and style. So after you have a track record as a reviewer, you might then join an editorial board. So the editorial board is an advisory group to the editor. They'll make suggestions on things for special issues, the direction of the journal, whether there's certain areas that we might want to try to solicit more manuscripts on and focus on. Ideally, the editorial board members also review manuscripts for the journal. Uh, and sometimes you'll see journals with an editorial board and an editorial review board or a review board. So the review board tends to just be people who review manuscripts, but aren't necessarily on the editorial board that is the advisory committee. Editorial board meetings usually are at least once a year. Some journals will have them 2 or 3 times a year, depending on the journal. But the things that you need basically are experience as an author and a reviewer, can understand the mission of the journal and the journal's scope, and be willing to help out and support the success of the journal. Sometimes, in order to get on an editorial board, it doesn't hurt to speak up and ask. So I first got on the editorial board for Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing because I realized at the end of a year, looking at my account and as a reviewer, that I had reviewed, I think, 6 manuscripts for them in the prior year or 18 months. And so I reached out to the editor who I had met and knew through conferences and things and said, hey, if you have an opening on your editorial board, I've been reviewing a lot of manuscripts for you. I'd like the opportunity to join. And so that led me to be invited to the editorial board, and kind of things progressed from there. So sometimes it doesn't hurt to express interest to editors if you feel you've reviewed for that journal and provided some service to the journal and you'd like to move that up a level to be on the editorial board. There may not be a spot on the editorial board at the time, but then you're on the editor's radar for when things open up or needs arise. And it could also lead you to be invited to guest edit a special issue or something like that too, if they know you have an interest in a higher level of involvement in the journal. So associate editors are part of the editorial team who assist with the peer review process. At WJNR, the associate editor's primary role is to identify and invite reviewers and make recommendations on manuscripts. At some journals, they'll have associate editors for certain topic areas, particularly specialty journals that then have kind of subspecialty areas. They might have people covering certain areas, or they might have a reviews editor and, or things like that. So where they're kind of specialized that way. But not all journals use associate editors. It just kind of depends on the structure and the scope and the size of the journal. So WJNR in the past didn't have associate editors, but our number of submissions per year has continued to steadily grow year after year. And so we have added in associate editors, which really helps to be us to be able to review more manuscripts and then publish more manuscripts. Um, and many hands then make light work and provides the associate editor role also provides a lot of experience for people who might want to then become journal editors. And then there's the editor role. So after you've been an associate editor for a while, you can potentially move into the role of editor, where you are responsible for all the content in the journal. And so you're soliciting manuscripts from people. So I go through poster presentation sessions at conferences and try to drum up quality manuscripts from people. We oversee the peer review process, make decisions on manuscripts, create the table of contents for each issue, write editorials, handle concerns from authors, decision appeals. If there's a concern about plagiarism, we have to address that and go through the ethical review process of that. If there's any corrections or retractions, thankfully that doesn't happen very often. The editor gets to determine the submission guidelines for the journal and make sure that they stay updated and are clearly written. We review and make sure that the journal's aims and scope are up to date and in keeping with current trends and needs, and ensure that everything in the journal and the editorial review process and publication process is following ethical guidelines from the Committee on Publication Ethics and the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors and all of those standards. So the skills needed for this are typically experience as an author and reviewer, experience having been on an editorial board, and preferably as an associate editor or having guest edited some special issues. So you know how the process works as far as reviewing comments from reviewers and making decisions on manuscripts and time management. So this is typically a side gig that people are doing in addition to their main jobs, which is usually an academic role. And so for me, this is something that is kind of my evening and weekend thing. It is 10 plus hours a week, depending on the flow of manuscripts and whatnot. Some weeks it's more, so occasionally it's less. Um, but it can be a lot of time. And then you have the publisher, which is another role that we hadn't put in here. This is usually not necessarily a role that we would move into, but it is a key member of the publishing neighborhood. So the publisher is the organization that manages the publication of the journal. They market the journal, they handle the subscriptions, maintain the journal website, etc. Usually the publisher is the owner of the journal, but not always. So in WJNR's case, Sage is the publisher that owns the journal, and we have an affiliation with MNRS, the Midwest Nursing Research Society, as the official journal of MNRS. For some journals, the professional society might own the journal and contract with a publisher to publish the journal. So it just kind of depends on how that is set up and whether it's the publisher that owns the journal and then chooses the editor, or whether the society owns the journal and chooses the editor. So as far as resources, there's a lot of organizations out there that provide guidelines, support, and best practices for journal editing. There's the International Academy of Nursing Editors, INANE, which is an organization And they like to say that they're a non-organization because they don't have bylaws or any kind of official structure. It's sort of an anarchist group of nursing journal editors that have a conference every year and a listserv to discuss and share best practices for editing nursing journals. And so they have resources on their website. They also have a directory of nursing journals. And so on the inane website, there's a link to the inane directory of nursing journals, which is a list of verified, validated, legit nursing journals and how to contact them and the websites and all that. So that's a really useful tool. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors maintains standards for publishing of journals in healthcare. The Committee on Publication Ethics also has a lot of things related to the best practices and how to handle ethical issues in publication. They have frequent webinars and they do case studies that editors have actually encountered, and editors will submit these case studies to then be reviewed and discussed in live webinars through COPE. And also the World Association of Medical Editors is a broad, even broader organization um, that publishes best practices for editing. Okay, so we're about halfway through, and you've heard me just talk enough. Let's talk about questions that you have, because that's always a more fun part of all of this. So if you have questions, you're free to use the raise your hand thing, and we can and kind of call you out, and you can unmute and ask your question live if you like. That way, but usually raising your hand allows us to not have people talking over each other. Or if you're not able to unmute or you're not comfortable doing that, you're welcome to type in the chat any questions that you have, and we can um, yeah, talk about journal editing stuff or other roles in publishing.
Dr. Ruppar, I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little about how you came to become an editor. Is there any more or like
Oh, yeah,
skills
sure.
that you had that moved you?
So, yeah, so I was, yeah, kind of raised to be an editor by my PhD mentor. So my PhD advisor was Vicky Kahn, who was the previous editor of WJNR. Now, I did not necessarily become the editor of WJNR because she was my advisor, but she, during my PhD program, she would tell me a lot about the editor role and had me help out with some special projects with the journal. And so I was kind of um, uh, acculturated to the journal editing sort of world. And I thought that it would be a role that I would like. After I had been developing my research for some time, and I got on the editorial board at Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing shortly after I joined the editorial board, one of the co-editors of JCN, because they had a co-editor sort of setup, was going to retire from the journal, and they were going to replace her with an associate editor. And so I threw my hat in the ring and applied for that role. And what they ended up doing was hiring two associate editors, myself and Vicki Dixon. And so we had an editor in chief and two associate editors. And after a couple of years, um, Vicki and I became co-editors along with Deb Moser, as kind of a three co-editor sort of arrangement, although Deb Moser, being the senior person, was still always kind of running the show above us. Um, and so we did that. I did that for several years. And as my contract was up for renewal with Wolters Kluwer for the JCN role, um, Vicky Kahn said that she was retiring from WJNR. Um, and so the timing worked out for me to make that change. And I knew I would kick myself if I didn't at least throw my hat in the ring for that. And so I applied to be editor of WJNR because I thought it would be interesting to move from a specialty journal focused on cardiovascular nursing to a more general nursing research journal where I felt I might have a broader impact on things. Okay, there's a question in the chat. I know that as a published author, there is no pay, but what about reviewer, editorial board, associate editor, and editor? Um, so for reviewers, there's typically also no pay. There are some predatory journals out there that will send you emails offering to pay you a stipend for reviewing manuscripts. I don't know if they actually ever pay those or not. But typically, being a reviewer is also a volunteer uh, job, and it's I view it as part of being a productive member of the academic society. Other people have reviewed my work in manuscript I've submitted, and so I am paying that back by reviewing other people's work. Editorial boards also are typically an unpaid role, but the time commitment for an editorial board is really generally relatively low. Um, so you're, attending one or two meetings a year, you're reviewing manuscripts for the journal that you've already usually been reviewing for, and helping to refer people or suggest the journal as a place for your people in your network to publish. Associate editor and editor roles are often paid, although not always. But usually they are. The stipend can range from up quite wide. Associate editor roles, it depends on the journal. There are some that are paid, but a lot of journals, the associate editor role is more of a volunteer role. So it just kind of depends. The paid ones are generally ask you to do a lot more. For the unpaid volunteer associate editor roles, you want to make sure that the editor is not asking you to do too much. And so at WJNR, I prefer to have a number of associate editors so that I'm not giving them more than one new manuscript a week to help find reviewers for. So I'm not asking them to do too much because Sage's model is that associate editors are not paid.
And going along with that, do how would you say being an editor, an associate editor, would impact your career, um, at least with your university, and how does that maybe you negotiate your time? Do you
That's a
have any,
that's a great question. So typically, universities view it as a positive because, every month or, 2 months, depending on how often the journal's published, that university's name is right there in the journal with you as the editor or associate editor. So that's usually viewed very positively because it's good positive exposure for your school. Um, but the trick is to make sure that your editor role does not come into any conflict with your academic role, and your main job. And so I uh, keep a lot of things separate. I have a separate email account for the journal, things like that. But there's also a lot of overlap because what I do for the journal also helps me to do my role as an associate dean for research and um, provide feedback on faculty members and students' manuscripts, suggestions for how to deal with reviewer comments, things like that. So there's usually a pretty good symbiosis between your academic role and your journal editor role. Um, Sometimes deans don't see it that way. I had a dean in the past who uh, viewed my editor role as a drain on my time. But I made it clear that this was a side thing that I did in evenings and weekends, and it was not a drain on my time. But sometimes deans will know that the editor roles come with a stipend and they want that money. Um, but this is not something that I do as part of my university role, so it's just a matter of how you set it up. But if you're looking to take on an editor position, it's helpful to talk with your department chair or dean about that and say, it's something I'm looking at doing. How would the school or the college view that? Is this something that you would support me doing as part of my service and outside service role, in addition to everything that I'm already doing and going to continue doing in my academic role? That way you avoid uh, any any negativity or problems. In some places, the publisher will provide some funding to support part of a staff person at your university to be an editorial office assistant on your journal. That doesn't happen as much anymore as it used to, but that's also something that can be negotiated where some funds come from the publisher to the school to pay for part of a staff person.
Another question I had gotten in a private message was if a researcher is qualitative um, but has the expertise in the area of the article, does the journal help them with statistics or?
Yeah, so with those sorts of things, what I suggest is that anytime you submit a review, there's the comments that go to the author, and there's the confidential comments to the editor. And in the confidential comments to the editor, just say, I'm focusing on, the content, but I'm a qualitative researcher, so my critique is not covering any of the statistical analysis. And that way the editor knows that, the fact that you didn't say anything about the analysis doesn't mean it's necessarily okay. It just means it's outside the scope of your expertise. And that's okay because they'll have other reviewers who will cover that.
Okay. Mm. From the other Connie, is there like a time in your career you would recommend getting involved as an editor, associate editor? Um,
Um,
or,
that's a good question. Typically, if you're in a position, so it's not something that I would recommend if you're on tenure track.
okay.
If you're in a tenure track role, your priority is to get tenure. And you don't want something that is potentially going to compete in any way with the level of effort you need to put in to that. So, but once you have tenure, or if you're in a clinical faculty position where you don't have that kind of pressure, then you're in a place where it might be something you can entertain more. But really, it needs to be something that uh, you can balance with your workload and your life load. I took this on my first journal editing role was as my youngest was starting high school, and so my kids were doing their own thing more, and it was less. Um, that was less of an issue or a concern. And then when I became editor of WJNR, it was as my youngest was finishing high school and my family and I were entering kind of an empty nesting phase. And so if I was, working on journal stuff in the evening, I wouldn't be, ignoring my children. And so that worked out well. But you have to kind of make the decisions that work best for how to fit an additional um, intensive kind of role into everything in your life. As far as the question about would I recommend any of this as someone moves toward and into retirement, um, there are a number of journal editors in nursing journals who are retired from their primary jobs and still editing in retirement. And so that is something that a lot of people do. The trick is making sure that are still keeping up enough with research methods and trends in the literature and things like that to be able to keep up with that. And the other thing, like we do with a lot of roles, is always also be thinking about a succession plan. Even when you start something, it's like, okay, well, who am I looking at preparing for taking this over when I decide I'm done doing this editing thing? Or, if God forbid something were to happen to the person who's the editor, is there somebody who could come in and keep the journal going if there were a major health issue or something like that? Um, so that is also something that we are generally asked by publishers to keep in mind and make sure that there are um, people on an editorial team who could then step in and move into those roles. Um, Other questions? Let's see. You're all quiet today. Um, if someone's interested in reviewing for journals, yes, so one thing you could do is let your mentors know that you would like to get some experience reviewing. And then when your mentor is invited to review a manuscript, they can contact the editor and say, "Hi, I'd like to review this alongside my mentee." And and then the journal will invite you as well so that you get credit for doing that review. And you and your mentor each review the manuscript, and then you can compare your reviews along with your mentor so you get some feedback on that before you submit it. So that's one recommended way of getting some experience um, in a mentored fashion. You can also reach out to editors of journals and say, "Hi, I'm interested in being a reviewer. Uh, this is my area of focus if you have anything that comes up." And often what we might do is ask you to make an account as a reviewer on the journal's submission site so that your keywords are in there and we can find you when a manuscript in your area of expertise comes up. Um, because that's how, it's impossible to remember people's names and their areas of expertise in our heads. So we need those databases to be able to find people when the manuscripts come in. But Zena, who asked that question, since I know you, because you did your PhD at Rush University when I was the PhD program director there, I guarantee you, I will invite you to review manuscripts. Um, so next question was stuff about making special editions. So special issues, yeah, are journal issues that focus on a particular topic. And so the way editors often do it is either the editorial team or at an editorial board meeting, we'll kind of talk about, well, what are important or emerging topics in nursing science? Are there things that we're seeing a lot of manuscripts about? Are there things um, that we're getting a lot of requests about, and we'll put together a special issue on that. So a call for papers on a particular topic, and usually then we'll have a guest editor who is an expert in that area who will help with finding reviewers for the special issue papers, and will make decisions of what papers to include in the special issue and whatnot, and put together the table of contents for it and write a guest editorial for the special issue. So special issues are good because they help to recruit, drum up more quality submissions for the journal. Um, for me as an editor, it's a month where I don't have to write an editorial, which is nice. And it's a good way to highlight an important or emerging area of science, um, and demonstrate to authors that, hey, we're interested in this kind of research. So think about us as a place to publish. And it allows to kind of draws more attention to that topic as well, because we'll usually also promote the special issue on social media channels and things like that to draw more attention and readership to those manuscripts. And so if you have ideas for special issues, as an editor, I'm open to those, and usually for a guest editor, we want somebody who has a certain standing in that area of science so that they can also drum up manuscript submissions from their network. So it's a guest editor role often is um, less of a good fit for somebody who's new as a researcher, but as you're getting a little more experienced and approaching tenure or recently tenured and beyond to being a senior researcher, then that's something that is possible. Did that answer the special issue question? You said that was Ariella. Okay. The next question is, what is the pay range for an editor? That varies a lot. And it depends on the size of the journal, the number of submissions, the frequency of issues, the publisher. So I don't really have good data on the pay range. The Inane group had done a survey of nursing editors a few years ago that I don't recall off the top of my head what the range was that they found. Um, but that I think they may have published that in Nurse Author and Editor, which is an online journal, so that we might be able to find that. How do I see the role of editors evolving with AI tools and open peer review practices? Well, yeah, that's a whole ball of wax. So let's see. So AI is something that can be very, very helpful and useful. The trick is that AI cannot um, take responsibility for the content of the manuscript, and so the World Organization of Medical Editors, the ICJME, all of the publishers have come out with policies that basically state that if you use generative AI in your manuscript preparation in any way, that needs to be disclosed. Uh, AI tools and chatbots cannot be authors of manuscripts because they cannot take responsibility for the content in the manuscript, and an author has to be able to take responsibility for the content of the article. And it's still the author's responsibility to confirm and verify the accuracy of everything that they get from an AI tool that they might use to help them with generating ideas or writing things or finding uh, references and citations. I have, in some cases, had some manuscripts, one in particular I can think of, where it was very clear from metadata and formatting inaccuracies and things that were in the reference list that they had used references that were generated by AI. And so that I gave them the opportunity to correct it. But if there is inappropriate AI use or made up references, usually that will get you rejected very quickly. Um, because that the authors ultimately are responsible for confirming and making sure everything is accurate. And if you're not going to be detailed enough and do the due diligence to review and confirm everything before you submit it, then you're wasting the time of the reviewers and the editors, and we're going to reject your work because it if it's not accurate, if it's using made up references, then it is not passing the scholarly rigor tests. At the same time, there are tools that can be very useful for streamlining some of the processes, for helping authors to improve the spelling and grammar and punctuation. A lot of the tools out there, Grammarly and things like that, are AI based that help you with refining your writing. Um, we don't yet have ways for using AI for being a manuscript reviewer because AI is going to spit out at you what it thinks you want to hear, but it does not necessarily have the ability to really analyze and critically think about the rigor and the appropriateness of things in a manuscript. And with most AI tools, if you put the manuscript in there, you are violating the confidentiality of that manuscript content because then the AI tool is learning from somebody else's work that you didn't have permission to put into an AI tool, and B, that work is not yet peer reviewed. And so the accuracy of that work that is being fed into the AI tool is only going to put in potentially inaccurate stuff into an AI chatbot that is going to learn from that and learn wrong. So when you agree to review a manuscript at almost every journal, I think now you are agreeing that you will not be using AI tools to generate your review. You might have it help you summarize a list of thoughts that you've written down, but you cannot load a manuscript you're reviewing into an AI tool.
Kind of going along with that, are there a lot of ethical challenges that you face as an editor, whether it's like plagiarism or made up data, or like reviewers that might know who wrote the article that they're reviewing?
Yeah, so we see plagiarism semi-regularly. So every manuscript that comes in, excuse me, goes gets plagiarism checked, and then we review that to see, okay, is this really concerning, or is it just a lot of very common phrases. So we don't just rely on the percentage of overlap that it spits out at us. We look to see if it's real or not, and look at the sources that the um, I'm blanking on the name of the one that Sage uses, but that the plagiarism checker finds. So we have some human checks along with that. Um, and I have, as an editor, I keep a whole list of kind of boilerplate comments to authors, and one of those is something where if I find significant overlap and I'm rejecting the manuscript, I have some feedback that I will send to the authors saying, this is why we're rejecting it. There's concerning overlap. Please review your manuscript for text overlap with other things. I generally avoid coming out and accusing somebody of plagiarism, but I alert them that we have identified significant overlap that could be interpreted as plagiarism. They need to look into this before they submit to another journal. Um, I've had instances where reviewers have caught overlap that the the plagiarism detection software didn't. I've also had instances where reviewers thought they found overlap, but I looked into it and I didn't see it there, even with what the reviewer said it was overlapped with. So it just kind of depends. So sometimes you have to go through and take the time to review and compare things, and then respond to the people who are raising concerns. And it's all about clear communication and verifying things. Um, Something that I've talked a bit about uh, with Rita Pickler, who's the editor of Nursing Research, is references, and making sure that references that are used in manuscripts can be located by the editors and the authors. And so if people are using references from journals that we can't find online, then that's not a legitimate enough reference to be able to use. And so authors need to make sure that references are locatable by anybody who's reading their manuscript. I've seen problems with that more recently. Um, yeah, thankfully, knock on wood, we have not had any retractions since I've been the editor. I would love to continue that track record. Um, every so often, there's a need to correct things, but um, I don't think we've even had one of those since I was just starting. So yeah, but things do come up, and sometimes we will when we're identifying reviewers, we will miss that a reviewer is at the same place as the author, um, which we need to avoid that happening. But that happens sometimes, or sometimes the reviewer will reply and say, I based on the topic and the description, I know who these authors are, and so I don't feel I should review this manuscript, and that's appropriate. And so then we uninvite that person. Thank you for letting us know. We'll invite somebody else. So yeah, that happens.
I think the last one was from Daphne. Is there a way to go about becoming a reviewer for WJNR?
Um, yes. So basically, there are two ways. One is you can go to the WJNR submission site and create an account, and put in your keywords as a reviewer. But you can also email me at editor@wjnr.net and say, hi, I'm Daphne, and this is my area of expertise I'd like to review. And I do have a list that I keep of people who've expressed interest in reviewing and what their topics are, so that I can check that occasionally and serve as a reminder to send invitations to new reviewers who would like to be reviewers. But um, because our reviewer database and the set of keywords that are in there are far from perfect. Um, so the way I find reviewers are searching in our database. I will also do a Scopus search um, on keywords and things from the manuscript that I'm looking for reviewers for, and find people who've published in that area. And in Scopus, what I can do then is I can click on the author's name, and it can show me for sure that they've published other things on that. because sometimes somebody is a co-author on something and it's not really their area, but they advised that student or something, and so that they're not necessarily really a good reviewer for that topic, but they just happen to be on that paper. I mean, I was a methods expert on an orthopedic surgery meta-analysis, and I am not an ortho nurse or an expert in anything orthopedic related, but I'm on that paper. So, sometimes people are on co-authors on things that's not in their area of expertise. So Scopus allows me to make sure that people are really a published expert in that area before I invite them. Um, but yeah, so feel free to reach out. And there's a question about, is it good to be a reviewer for more than one journal? Sure. Yeah. You can take that to an extreme, which I have to admit I did earlier in my career. I've gotten a little more selective as I've become old, but it can be helpful to pick a few. The trick is making sure that you're reviewing things that you feel you are a good enough fit for, and that you're not letting yourself be bogged down too much by review requests, because some journals will send you stuff every month. My rule is that I don't invite someone if they have been invited or completed a review for WJNR in the past 3 months. Every so often, I might get close to getting a little less than 3 months, um, but I try not to invite people more than 3 months apart so that I don't annoy potential reviewers. Um, because reviewers are very valued and precious to me, and I don't want to irritate anybody. Unfortunately, I once inadvertently invited someone for two different manuscripts 2 weeks apart, because some journal submission systems will allow you to designate, reviewers and then alternate reviewers, and the system will automatically invite the next person on the alternate list if somebody that you invited declines. In the system I used to use at Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing, if I was searching for reviewers, it would tell me if someone was already an alternate reviewer for another manuscript. Scholar One that we use for WJNR does not tell you that. And so I inadvertently um, had somebody as an alternate reviewer who, on two different manuscripts, that person was the president of MNRS at the time, and emailed me about it. I apologized profusely, took her off, uninvited her from one of them, and then changed our procedures so we no longer do the automatic alternate reviewer invitations, so that we avoid that. And I just go in daily, and if there are anywhere we need to invite more, I will click and make sure they've not been invited for any other manuscripts before I hit the invite button. Yeah, but yeah, there's no problem with being a reviewer for more than one journal. And if you have other questions about reviewing, editing, publishing, how journals are run, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer questions. We also have editors' special sessions at MNRS every year, where we have a panel of editors who love to answer questions about journals and publishing. So, but yeah, I see where you are at time. So thank you all so much for your time today and your interest, and uh, have a great rest of your day.
And thank you again, Dr. Ruppar. And there will be a recording of this session available shortly on the MNRS website if you want to tell your friends and colleagues to come check it out. So thank you for coming today.